Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, and it is one of my favorite segments of the week here on the show. It's my Don't Be Surprised If segment where I make some bold fantasy claims for the week ahead, and this week I truly went pretty bold. A lot of these takes may not even happen. Some might be the shocks of the weekend, but I still love doing it just to get your guys' wheels moving in your brains and getting you prepared for this coming week from a fantasy perspective. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Let's start off pretty crazy here. I think this is perhaps the biggest long shot out of all these claims this week. But I feel like there are ways that this team can pull this off, right? Because what I've seen from this team, especially on this side of the football that I'm going to talk about, is that they can make you uncomfortable. And I don't necessarily know if the team they're playing is going to feel that uncomfortable against them in many different situations, but I feel like this team has the capability to drag them into their style of play. So let's make this bold proclamation by saying the Colts will upset the Lions behind a strong top 5 defensive effort. And funnily enough, when we look at yesterday's game for the Colts, their offense stepped up in a big way, and the defense actually looked a little bit lackluster there in that second half. But think about what this Colts defense from top to bottom looks like. They have some solid pass rushes up front, a lot of depth up there, like guys like Buckner and Stewart who can generate pressure from the edge and the interior. Their linebacking core is one of the most underrated in the National Football League. And their secondary, yes, pretty young, but still trustworthy enough. And this is not necessarily something that I'm going to say wholeheartedly. Trustworthy enough to hold up in coverage in certain situations. So this one certainly feels way out there from a claim perspective, but the reason why it can be justified is they might just have a game plan. From your linebacking core, who you're going to have to rely on a lot in this game. You're going to have to squeeze the middle of the field because Amon-Ra and Jameson Williams are going to want to run crossers, or Amon-Ra's going to want to run an intermediate route, kind of occupy the middle of the field to try and get Jameson Williams on the outside open down the field. They're going to throw a lot of looks at you. So your linebackers have to stay disciplined, squeeze the middle of the field, try and make it so that Amon-Ra is not an easy target in, say, second down and short, third and short situations. And most importantly, make sure that your secondary holds up against Jameson Williams because he's the biggest threat in this game for the Lions. And then in the run game, you just have to match Montgomery and Gibbs' physicality up front. And you also have to penetrate this very tough offensive line through the interior or through the edge. It's going to have to happen more towards the interior, which is a pretty daunting task, but I think can be done, with different stunts and looks that you can throw at them. But mainly what I'm saying is a lot of their pressure is going to have to come from their front seven because the secondary is my worry here. If all that happens and Anthony Richardson plays like he did last week and scores enough points, then we might be onto something. But it's a very huge if and perhaps the biggest long shot here. However, I'm sticking with it just because this Colts team has shown me something. They can play tough physical defense against some top teams. They did against the Vikings. They've done it countless times throughout the season as well. And it's the reason why they're in the thick of the AFC wildcard picture. So this is no slouch for defense right now. It's steadily improved throughout the season. And this test is going to be their toughest of the season to date and potentially ever this season. But they have ways to pull it off. So look for them to potentially do something special next Sunday. Now, for the second one, this one is a little bit more of a tamer kind of claim here. I really like it just because of the possibilities from both sides in terms of fantasy prospects is the Cardinals and Seahawks being the best game from a fantasy perspective. From the Seahawks, you have a lot of wealth in the wide receiver core tap here. DK is going to have a big day. The emergence of JSN. We're going to be talking a lot about this team this week in a very pivotal game there in the NFC West. But on the Cardinal side of things, you have to like what Kyler Murray's done this season, potential dark horse MVP candidate. You have to like his rapport with a guy like Trey McBride, who is perhaps the most physical player right now in the entirety of the NFC West. And then when you have to throw in the fact that Seattle's going to have to account for Marvin Harrison Jr., this has all the makings of a classic shootout. And I feel like no matter who wins this football game, fantasy football managers will be rejoicing everywhere. I even think that, a much maligned run game for Seattle can get going on this one. Kenneth Walker might have a big day. So look no further than this game if you're having trouble sending your fantasy roster, because I feel wholeheartedly that this game is not necessarily going to be an offensive slugfest. These are two of the worst defenses in the NFC West, and I feel like it's going to come down to who blinks first. So look for this game to give you a lot of fantasy football options down the stretch. I'm really excited for this one, a little bit nervous and apprehensive as a Seattle Seahawks fan, but I know that both of these teams are going to put up a valiant fight there at Lumen. The third one that I want to shout out, how about CJ Stroud continuing to struggle against these really feisty lower tier defenses? Not necessarily lower tier in terms of status, but in terms of where the teams are. They're facing the Titans this week, after this Monday night game, of course. And the way I feel about this game is that it should be an easy win. But considering the fact that in these weird matchups for the Texans going forward, where they may not place as much stock in them as other matchups they'll have down the line, it's going to reveal some things, some underlying narratives of the season particularly for this Texans side. Because this team is an enigmatic team at its core, in that they are good enough to win the AFC South, but are they good enough to win the entire AFC? That's where the questions are going to start to arise here. And so, looking at CJ Stroud and how he's performed this season, I still think he's capable of being one of the best QBs in the league. But looking at the trajectory of the season and looking at, the games the Texans have played, I feel like he's going to not necessarily be able to just go through games like this for the rest of the season. Because I feel like, yes, the AFC South is all but a wrap, but, you can't underestimate teams like the Titans and Jaguars just because other teams demolished them. The Titans and Jaguars have proven that they can stay in games. And if the Texans get dragged into that narrative against the Titans next week, chances are you're looking at another upset victory here. That's been the Texans' problem all along. Sometimes they get dragged into the flow of a game, and inferior opponents like the Jets did, maybe like even the Lions when they were really dominating them, and then the Lions came back and won that game, and they could have had one of the better wins in the National Football League this season. They have to find a way to get out of their own heads against teams when they are dominating, because they haven't been dominating like they were last season. And so, if this game is either a defensive slugfest or the Texans get out to an early lead, all eyes are going to be on CJ Stroud and how he performs in the complete nature of this game. And for several games on the stretch as well, because they do have a tougher schedule to end the year. So, my concern with Stroud lies in taking care of business. Can he do it now against inferior opponents and then have it translate into the playoffs as well. Because if not, then that's a true problem for the development of Stroud and the Texans as well. Because it's not something you want to have to look at and tinker with over the offseason that much. You're going to want to be able to pinpoint games like this and say, okay, guys, let's go out there and dominate. But right now, I can't say that wholeheartedly about the Texans today. The last one, I kind of feel like is the safest one that I made this week. Caleb Williams potentially outshining Darnold. Getting rid of Shane Waldron kind of did wonders even though the Bears lost for this offense. Caleb Williams looked sharper in this game, made better decisions, scrambled when he had to, shorter throws, more time in the pocket, didn't panic. Ultimately, everything you want to see out of a rookie quarterback when you're looking for signs of progress. And going up this week against the Vikings, I kind of feel like, this is a situation where the Bears could win this football game because the Vikings have really started to paper over the cracks, right? The defense is still one of the most elite in the league. But Sam Darnold has come back to earth a little bit. And in reality, when you look at the entirety of the season, he has been on earth, so to speak, for the entirety of the season. He's just been compensating for it. He's had a lot of bad decisions throughout the season. And now they're starting to rear their heads. But when I look at this game, I feel like it's going to be a tough one for Caleb, but now he has a platform where he can trust that Brown has his best intentions in mind and wants to see him improve, rather than, throwing him into the fire and expecting him to make magic with these receivers, with the Waldron philosophy. And I know many things about Waldron throughout his time in the NFL. But looking at this game, I think this is an opportunity for Caleb to prove that he is learning and he is taking his organization's best interests at heart. So I feel like on Sunday, this is going to be a game where Caleb truly comes into his own as an NFL quarterback. Let me know what you think in the comments, because that will just about do it for today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back here 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. As always, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show if you want to keep up with us. Consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube to contribute and interact with the show while we are streaming. But other than that, I am out for today. Have a good one.